one of the things that I wanted to make sure I did in this conversation is not interrupt you.
Let me ask you about vaccines. Listen,
No.
Hold on.
You're
But
raising this issue.
So I read your book, and by the end of the book, it was so disturbing that sometimes I had to put it away and just read fiction for a few days. I was like, I don't want this in my head right now, because I listen on audio, and a lot of times I'm listening in the sauna. So I'm listening while I'm already getting tortured. So it's 185 degrees, and I'm listening to this book, and then I was like, is this possible that this is the guy that's telling the truth? Is this possible that everyone that I know that had these strong opinions of you, that most of them at least were like me? They had formed these opinions through a glance at a headline, someone talking about you on a television show.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing about that book is that it is depressing to read.
And where's the mercury coming from?
The mercury was largely coming from coal-burning power plants. It's in the geology in the coal, and it precipitates out, when there's rain. When you burn the coal, it's in the, it's an element, so it doesn't degrade. And when the rain comes, it falls onto the landscapes, then it washes off the landscapes into the rivers. Her name was Sarah Bridges. She was a psychologist from Minnesota, and she found my home. She came to it. She took out of the trunk of her car a pile of scientific studies that was 18 inches thick. She put it on my front porch, my stoop, and then she rang the bell, and then she pointed to that pile, and she said, I'm not leaving here till you read those. Before I was 6 inches down in that pile, I recognized that there was this huge delta between what the public health agencies were telling us about vaccine safety and what the actual peer-reviewed published science was saying. Then I took the next step, which is I started calling people, high-level public officials, and I had access to everyone. I called Francis Collins. I called Marie McCormick, who ran the Institute of Medicine at the National Academy of Sciences. I called Kathleen Stratton at the National Academy of Sciences, who was the chief staffer, and I was asking her about these studies. And I realized during these conversations that none of these people had read any of the science. They were just repeating things that they had been told about the science. And they kept saying to me, well, I can't answer that detailed question. You need to talk to Paul Offit. Well, Paul Offit is a vaccine developer who made a $186 million deal with Merck on the rotavirus vaccine. And it was odd to me that government regulators were saying you should talk to somebody in the industry. But then he said this, I asked him about how can you be, telling people not to eat, women not to eat tuna fish, but giving them a flu shot that has, these huge doses. And he said, well, Bobby, there's two kinds of mercury. There's a good mercury and there's a bad mercury. And the minute he said, and I knew there's a different kind of mercury in the vaccines. It's ethyl mercury in the vaccines and methyl mercury in the fish. But I know by then you can imagine, I know a lot about mercury. I've been suing people. When you sue somebody, you get a PhD in that. You know more than anybody in the world. You have to, or you're not going to win your lawsuit. So I knew a lot about mercury, and I knew that his argument was not with me, but it was with the periodic tables, because there's no such thing as a good mercury. What he found was the mercury, yes, it left their blood immediately. The ethyl mercury from the vaccines was gone from their blood in a week. The methyl mercury from the tuna fish was there 2 months later. But when he sacrificed the monkeys and did postmortems, he found that the mercury had not left their body. Instead, the reason it was disappearing from their blood is because ethyl mercury crosses the blood-brain barrier much easier than methyl mercury. The ethyl mercury from the vaccines was going directly to the brains of these animals, and it was lodging there and causing severe inflammation. And we now know it's there 20 years later. So so when Burba went off, and when I'm on the phone with Offit, and he said the ethyl mercury is excreted quickly, and I said, how do you know that? And he said, because of the Picciero study. Because the study by Picciero found that it was excreted quick in a week. And I said, but you're familiar with the Burbacker study. that showed it's gone to the brain. And there was dead silence on the phone. And then he said to me, he kind of hemmed and hawed and said, well, you're right. It's not that study, it's just a whole mosaic of studies. And I said, can you cite any for me? And he said, I'll send them to you. And he never did. That's the last I heard from him.
So why was there a medical consensus that was keeping out renowned scientists from the conversation when they were telling us on television, we don't know a lot about this virus, we're trying to figure it out? Scientists that were on the ground, that were dealing with patients, were being censored, were being shut down, their YouTube channels were being shut down, their LinkedIns were being shut down.
Because the individual scientist does not matter.